Welcome back to the podcast, guys. I am so excited because this week on Writer's Advice, we have an editor, which is amazing. We have editor Tegan Lyon. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me, Olivia. I'm really excited.
Yeah, because a lot of the questions that I get when I put questions out there are around editing. And so I feel like this episode is really going to be great for anyone that does have they've just worked on their first manuscript and has questions of where to go from there. But also I feel like you're going to give us so much just like tips even for like self-editing. I mean, it's a constant process for anyone, no matter where they're at in the journey. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. What I'll start with is, so how did you get into this? Have you always been a reader? What has been the journey for you?
Yeah, definitely have always been a reader from a really young age. And I suppose I was a writer first, and I still am a writer, but not a very self-disciplined one. I'm a lot more of a self-disciplined editor. So I started out writing, and then, I finished my undergrad in creative writing at RMIT and kind of took a few years off traveling, and then wanted to enter the workforce. And I started working at this small magazine publishing company, and very quickly I was promoted to editor. And so I kind of got my first taste there. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I worked with some wonderful young women who had studied editing before, and they kind of showed me the ropes. And then I really got a taste for it. And I thought, okay, now I want to go back. I want to get my master's and really learn how to edit properly and fill in the gaps that were kind of missing from just like sort of straight entering the workforce. So I've been doing my master's in creative writing, publishing and editing at the University of Melbourne. I'm almost finished. It's a 2-year program. And I've kind of been freelancing along the way and picking up clients as I go and getting more practical experience sort of in the workforce, and then just building on that with like the academic studies as well. So it's also a journey for me. I'm learning constantly every week, and yeah, just building from there. So it's been really exciting so far.
Yeah, that's amazing. And go you, because the discipline to then do a master's, I would say that you have a lot of discipline with that. Like I wish I had that. That's absolutely amazing. So moving into freelance work, so you do a bit of editing for all types. So are you taking on all different fiction projects, non-fiction projects? Where are you kind of at the moment?
Yeah, I at the moment don't really discriminate. I kind of get a little bit of everything. I've worked freelance with a couple of companies who provide editing services. So I've worked with the expert editor for about 2 years now, and that can be anything from YA fiction or a business proposal, or even a job application in academia. So it's really varied. And then I've also been sort of taking on my own personal clients and getting to edit romance fiction, which I love. That's really great. And also getting a little bit more experience in editing, being kind of doing like self-help kind of work as
Awesome.
well with the Kind Press. And
Oh yeah.
they take a sort of holistic approach with their books in terms of like, working on yourself inside to manifest things outside, which has been quite teachable for me. And yeah, really varied as well. So I get a little bit of nonfiction and a little bit of fiction, but I'm always partial to fiction. That's where my real love lies.
Yeah. And like I mean, I applaud you for I'm just like applauding you right now for doing a master's in editing, because I feel like editing is everyone's, I mean, personally, and I just saw a lot of people I've spoken to, it can be a little bit of a nemesis, like it's
Definitely.
so great, but you need to separate that creative side of yourself to then put yourself in an editing kind of position. So yeah, how do you do that to start off with? How do you really put on that editing eye when you're working on someone's work? Yeah, that's the first question I'll ask before I.
Yeah, great question. So I guess the main thing as an editor is you're acting as the stand-in for the reader. So you're needing to work on clarity of expression and kind of reading it as if the first time you read it anyway, you should be reading it as if you were just a reader, picking up a book for the first time. What's jumping out at you? What's not quite working? What's taking you out of the reading experience, and starting from there. And then, it's kind of tricky sometimes because I have my writer brain on, and I can understand, why someone wouldn't want to kill their darlings. But then from an editor's point of view, I think, well, this isn't coming across as intended. Like, how can we work on this? How can we sharpen it? And yeah, that's kind of how I try to separate the two. And, as an editor, sometimes you have to be a little bit ruthless, but also you have to really practice compassion and make sure that you encourage and nurture your writers too, because, you know, it can't all just be like negatives, or not even negatives, but things to work on. You need to also praise what they're doing really well. So yeah, that's a combination of things.
Yeah, 100%, because I guess you are paid to take something apart, but like you are taking someone's work apart. So
yeah, and you want them to keep going, you know, you want to just keep refining and making the project the best version of itself that it can be. And, you know, sometimes that does mean being a little bit more, more ruthless, but then also being kind and understanding why someone would be attached to an idea or a character. And I suppose I have a little bit more empathy in certain ways because I'm a writer too, so I can understand that as well.
Yeah, 100%. And when it comes to, I'm just going to talk about fiction work for the moment, or even nonfiction as well. Anyone who's written a book, are there a couple of things that you see are a common occurrence that you find pop up in people's work when it comes to needing to edit, like just certain things to do with craft or grammar, etc.? What do you see as a common occurrence for maybe more first-time writers?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, grammar is a big one. Grammar, syntax, definitely clarity of expression, and I think as well consistency with character, and then also you know, narrative tension is a hard one to work at. I work at it all the time as a writer, and I can't perfect it yet. So that's something that you need to, or that I see a lot crop up as well. And yeah, I think repetition of expression as well, I see a lot for first time writers. And, you know, sometimes it can be hard to really push an idea and, you know, avoid slipping into cliches, but that's where editors can really help. And that's what I really try to look out for as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really interesting when someone's first getting into writing, you notice those words that you constantly use.
Yes. Yes, I read certain writers and like, okay, this is their favorite word at the moment. And like, how can we challenge this? Like, let's, you know, brainstorm synonyms together.
Yeah, 100%. And so what would you say is the ideal editing process? So say someone's just finished their manuscript. What are some tips that you would give for someone to self-edit?
So I think one of the best things that you can do is create some distance between you and your manuscript. And sometimes that means not looking at it for months and then attacking it with a fresh eye, and you're not quite as attached to certain passages or characters that you were before, and you can be a little bit more pragmatic with things and not so subjective. I think that's really important, just getting distance with the text. And then also, yeah, maybe trying to read it a bit more as if you were a reader, and, you know, what's exciting you about your book, what are you most looking forward to discovering, like what are you really attached to, I think is important. And then you can kind of cull a lot that's not really quite so important, and that's more in terms of like a structural overview. And then when you're going through your own book as well, sometimes when you do see those words that you use a lot of, I find like just from a technical point of view, doing, you know, a quick like Control F search and just seeing like how many times have I used this word, and, you know, being like, okay, I'm mentally flagging that now. And I think as well, just going through, and if you're not sure how you should be using a comma or a certain punctuation, you know, go back and find out how you should be using it. You can speak to another editor or do a bit more reading as well. And yeah, I think that sometimes if you don't know necessarily how to use like a semicolon, for example, no semicolon, let's stick with commas, that sort of thing.
Yeah, keep with the basics and then use an editor that way. Awesome.
Mhm.
And say someone wants to process, they've done that, they've made their manuscript the best that they believe they can. I really love how you said leave it for so many months as well, or like so many days, just to get the story out of your head. What would be the process then to work with an editor? How many different edits do you recommend doing? What's kind of the process that you recommend for someone?
Yeah, I think doing a couple of passes through is really important. And, you know, letting obviously the editor do their first read through and starting from an overall sort of look at structure and working through that first. And then you can kind of flag bigger picture issues like characterization, narrative tension, plot, language, that sort of thing. And then once that sort of you've looked through that in one pass, then to go back and do the full copy edit. and then send that back to the author, and then author sends it back to the editor. We do another copy edit, and then depends really how many copy edits you need. Depends on how developed your text is so far, but you might sort of need maybe 2 to 3 rounds. And then when you get to maybe a stage where you're paying a typesetter to put your book together, then you can go back and do the proof, and you might do a couple of proofs through the whole manuscript. There's always mistakes to be found. Like, even in published books, we find mistakes and it happens. We're all human. But I think that, yeah, really a few rounds for editing and also proofreading is important. But it also depends on how much money you have as a self-starting author. Like, not everyone can afford that. So sometimes it is just 1 or 2 rounds of edits, and that's fine. Like, if that's all you can put together for the time being, that's okay, and you can work on it yourself more if you need to.
Yeah, 100%. And I just want to go back to the general structure, the structure editing, like the initial one that you just said. What are some good things for people to focus on, like some good points that people could write down, or questions to ask themselves if they're going through a structural edit and not quite sure where to go or how to go with something? Is there anything that you recommend there?
Yeah, I think plotting is really important. So kind of working out, first of all, like, what is the structure of your narrative? Is it episodic, where you have sort of like each chapter begins with, like almost like a plateau, and then you have a climax, and then you lead on to the next chapter? Or maybe you have a, strictly chronological narrative, or maybe a circular narrative where you start with a point in the character's journey, and then you go back in time, and then you retell the story until you reach the point where you began. And so working out what structure you're trying to tell the story in, and then also point of view is a really important one. And why is this character telling this story, and from what vantage point are they telling it? Are they looking back and reflecting, where they can I guess just reflect on their own experiences and make their own judgments now? Or are they living in the present moment? Are you telling it in present tense from the point of view of being a 15-year-old, where everything feels immediate, and there's a lot of drama and a lot of pathos and that sort of thing? So I think that that's really important, is asking yourself as a writer, and I do it as an editor when I'm looking at things structurally, is asking myself, why have I done this? Like, why is this choice being made? And just interrogating everything and kind of going from there.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's also too really great, to have that break in between, because after you've just fully created something, you almost need to get analytical with yourself and keep asking those questions why, so you 100% know. Before, you said that 2 of the like major points that you see in people's editing, one was characterization, and the other one, I think, did you say like plot and structure essentially?
Yeah, plot and structure, like narrative tension as well, which also kind of leads into your structure as well.
Yeah.
But definitely characterization. Like, I see a lot of the times when I'm editing with fiction, especially, is characters behaving out of character, and sometimes, or most often, it's because the writer's trying to force them to do a certain thing to serve the plot, rather than having them actually act in character. And I think that, picking up those points as an editor when I'm reading, this character's behaving in a way that's not consistent with how they have been so far. Why are they doing that? And, kind of going back and workshopping and really getting into the mindset of the character, and making sure that they're living, breathing own entities and not just serving the plot.
Yeah, 100%. And what do you have? Is there any little points that you have of people asking themselves why with that, on how to keep characterization consistent essentially throughout a book?
I think it's a good idea to, I guess, kind of like imagine the backstory of all of your characters, even if they're a minor character. Like, they have their own lives, and you don't have to write this into the plot, into the story, because then they're kind of just being expositional the whole time. But sort of like living in the mind of your characters, and like what they might be doing, and why they have the relationship they do with the setting and their world around them, and the other characters that they interact with. And you kind of have to do a lot of deep diving into all of your characters, I think. And also just making sure that even little things that could take the reader out of the experience, like not always necessarily with the way that the characters behave, but even just like descriptions of their appearance. I a lot. You know, a character started out with blonde hair and then in 3 chapters she has brown hair, or, you know, little things like that. That again, having that distance from the text will make you see those things because you'll be jarred out of the reading experience. And that's the biggest thing when you're either you're self-editing, when you're editing, is like the minute you are no longer out of the story or you find yourself like the mind is wandering, like there's a reason why. It's usually like, you know, characters behaving the way that they wouldn't, or you know, language choices or that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's so true. That's a really good thing to think of that I actually haven't even put through my own editing before. Is like, if you do start to drift, okay, where was that moment that I
Yeah,
was
like
like, hang
highlight
on,
that.
I'm
Okay,
checked
we're
out
coming
for a
back to it.
second.
Yeah.
I love that. And when it comes to plot and tension, like I know tension is my like building tension in something or not getting to the peak, because I don't know, you just
Yeah,
that's
it's
one
hard
thing that I
because
know.
you want to get to the meat of a story, and you want to
Yeah.
get to the meat of a character and their relationship as well. Like, and that's exciting, but you also really have to, you know, all the time in uni we talk about drip feeding the reader, like just little details and not showing your hand all at once. You know, you can have this backstory in your head, but you need to work out moments where it's going to be most impactful to the reader when you finally reveal them. And that's a hard thing to do. It's tricky. Like I can't do it yet in my own writing. It's so hard. So I commend writers that can like really craft a story that has me on the edge of my seat the whole time. And it doesn't mean it has to be a thriller. Like I could just be so invested in a character's journey, you know, whatever age they are. But if you just sprinkle out these little details without revealing too much too soon, I think that you can create a lot of tension.
Yeah, 100% drip feeding the reader. I love that. I am so intrigued to hear about your writing, and how much planning do you put behind something to start off with? And how do you get, do you struggle now when you're like in that deep editing stage to not overthink that of it yet, or you're still able to take yourself away into the story?
I have always been horrible for self-editing as I go, and I am worse at it now that I am an editor.
That's
It's really
probably a
hard
great
because
thing
I am
because you
not a
can separate
plotter.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's really hard though. Like I'm not a plotter at all. I tend to write from a character point of view. That's where I start from. And so I sometimes just get stuck, and I had to kind of balance the two sometimes. And I think that I also am not I'm not a vomit drafter. Like I really commend people that can just get it on the page and then go back and hack through it. I just can't. Like I agonize over every paragraph, or you know, I lose steam because I'm like, no, this isn't right, it's not working, and then I have to go back. So I can give you advice on what not to do as a writer, but I have not quite perfected what to do. That's why I think that I just at the moment my strengths are definitely in editing. I can't necessarily get that distance with my own work, but I need to take my own advice and just write something and get it all down and then not look at it for a while. I do have an untouched NaNoWriMo manuscript from a couple of years ago, and it was at the time I was writing it, I was phoning a few chapters in for sure, as you do, because there's so many words every day. I recently looked at a couple of chapters and I was just amazed by how horrible it was. And I thought I will go back to this someday because it's there. It's there waiting for me, and I can just go and, you know, the magic happens in the editing process, and I'm hoping that I'll find a bit of magic that way.
Yeah, I love that. The magic does happen in the editing process. And this is why I don't know the quote. I wish I looked it up. There's a quote in Stephen King's book about like writing is great, but like editing is divine. I got that wrong. But
Oh, I love that. And I know exactly which book you mean. It's the memoir on writing. And that's what Stephen King does. You know, he locks himself away, writes a draft, and then doesn't touch it for like 3 or 6 months or something like that, which is insane. And, you know, I think it is really good advice. There's so much solid advice in that book.
yeah, so true. But to work with someone, like to have an editor to get you out of your own head, that you know is just honestly a gift. To have someone else read your drafts when you know they're far from perfect, but to edit as well, like to get someone to really pick your own brain apart too, because sometimes you just need someone else to like ask you those questions for you to help get out the best of the story, essentially. So I think it's so amazing. But yes, do you have any particular advice for writers who are struggling through something right now, or they're self-editing, or they're looking for their editing process? Is there any more advice that you would like to pass on?
Oh God, it's tricky because
I mean,
the getting distance is like the main one for sure. And I think that finding an editor that you can trust is so important. And I think as well, like sometimes there's, at least in my experience, I found that occasionally there might be a little bit of a sort of like writer versus editor mentality, but it's got to be a symbiotic relationship, because generally, an editor can make suggestions, but they shouldn't just outright slash things or rewrite things. Like, we're not all going to be Gordon-lish and cut everything out. But I think that eventually, like, the writer and the editor working together, 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, the author's going to come back with the best solution, because they know the work inside and out. The editor's seeing it from a reader's perspective and is going to sort of guide them to get to that point. So definitely finding an editor that you can trust, who isn't going to try and rewrite you. That's a really important thing.
Can I just pause you there, because I do have a question on that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go for it. Yeah.
How would you recommend someone go about that? Because I think that can be a very overwhelming process, to finding an editor that they can work well with and enjoy. Like, is there certain questions that you would recommend an author ask, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to obviously get a sample edit from the editor, and pay them for their time, of course. But I think getting an editor to do a manuscript appraisal for you will be really helpful, because even if it doesn't necessarily create the great editor author relationship that you want, you can still have someone look at your text in a really objective way and maybe point out some issues that you might not be seeing yourself, or even some great moments that you can kind of hold on to. I think that it's a really great way to meet good editors and to sort of start forging those relationships is definitely in writers groups and creative groups. Like, I've found, you and I found each other on the Young Australian Writers group, and that was great. And I think that groups like that, and kind of just like digging into your peer group, is really important, because you'll find a lot of gold there. Absolutely. And it can be tricky sort of like finding your editor. I like to think that everyone is coming into it with good intentions, but that's not always the case. But I think that also maybe getting a look at their past catalogue of work and seeing what they've edited before, if they've edited in your genre before, that's going to be really helpful, because they're going to know all the conventions. So that will be really great for your own book. And definitely get your sample from the editor and see what they've done and the kind of like tone they use when they make suggestions. And if you think that that's fine, if you think that maybe they're being too gentle or too hard with you, maybe re-examine.
Yeah, 100%.
But sometimes you need that. Sometimes you don't know, you might really need to kick up the butt, or I know I do as an editor. I'm like, as a writer, I'm like, yes, point out my mistakes, please. Like, edit me to hell.
I think that's actually something I love it too. I'm like, oh yeah, like I like pick me up on the thing, but I think that's something you have to go into it aware of, that you are asking an editor to pick your work apart. You are asking for that. You can't be too what's the word?
Precious.
Yeah. You can't be too precious when it comes to that stuff. So now, Tegan, please share with us where people can get in contact with you if they are looking for an editor. Anything particular you want to read? Maybe if there's someone that's got a manuscript that you want to work on. Give us all the details.
Yeah, definitely. So people can find me, they can email me. It's tegan.lyon@. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. It's all pretty much just Tegan Lyon. There's not many of us around, which is good. I do respond to everything really quickly. I'm on my emails constantly. So I'm always around.
Perfect. Awesome. I'll put that all in the show notes. And thank you so much for, you've just given us such a great overview of editing. So, it's great to like look at all those different levels of where someone is at next, where to go from there, and to how to view your story. So thank you so much for that, Tegan.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to help.
Thank you.